Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Michael Cibulsky.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's been truly an inspiring morning to hear from the individuals, the families, the caregivers fighting for their journey. I'm really pleased about this session today because we're going to talk about how we're going to break barriers and what are some of the pathways for innovation and access. And we have two distinguished colleagues here from two different organizations. We have Mike Lehmicke from the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, ARM. He's the Senior Vice President of Science and Industry Affairs, and we'll have you talk about your role here in a minute. We also have Minsk, who's a partner of Arnall, Gregory, which is a law firm. And maybe what we can do is start out, we'll talk about our roles, what our job is. I work for Rocket, of course, and I'll talk about my role here as well. But how about we start with Mike? Maybe you could describe a little bit about ARM, the organization, what your role is in advancing these regenerative therapies like cell and gene therapies.
Sure, thank you, Michael, and thank you to yourself and your colleagues at Rocket for inviting me to this important event today. So ARM, as we call ourselves, we're an advocacy organization at our core, and we focus exclusively on cell and gene therapies and ways to get cell and gene therapies to patients who desperately need them. So we advocate for our members. Our members are companies like Rocket Pharmaceuticals, companies who support companies like Rocket Pharmaceuticals, like Lonza. Our members are also patient organizations, academic organizations, and we really view it as an entire ecosystem that needs to come forward and work together to move these therapies forward. What I do specifically in my role is primarily regulatory advocacy. Always a little risky to talk about that right after lunch, so if anybody nods off, I won't take it personally. It's happened before. But that means I spend a lot of time working with FDA. We view them to be our partners. And as I say, speaking with many voices, the many voices of our members as one, to advocate for appropriate regulations to get these therapies to patients more quickly. We also, and I won't speak too much about it today, but I think we'll touch on it a little bit. We advocate for market access policies, reimbursement policies that we feel more truly reflect the value of cell and gene therapies, such as value-based payment models.
Excellent. Alan?
You were worried about after lunch. I'm the lawyer, and it's after lunch. So I don't know what that says, but I also appreciate and I'm honored to be here. I'm Alan Minsk. I'm a partner with a law firm called Arnall and Gregory. It's about 200 lawyers. My area, or my group's area, is FDA counseling, regulatory issues, quality issues, legal issues, helping companies get approval, pre-approval discussions, healthcare compliance, anything sort of that touches on FDA regulation is fair game. I've done this for 32 years, and I enjoy it. The gentleman who was talking from Lonza, that even though y'all are sort of on the front lines, it is nice when a drug product gets approved, or when a client will send me a note, you should know we had a patient advocacy day or something. While I'm not doing the hard work that the company's doing, I could have gone into real estate, I could have gone into corporate, and I kind of found food and drug law, and so I very much appreciate it. The connection to Rocket is that I've worked with some of your people when questions come up, and some of the people who are here now were previous companies that we advised, so it was nice to see some familiar faces.
Fantastic. And for those of you who don't know me, I work at Rocket Pharmaceuticals. I've been in rare disease for over 15 years in my career. It's a real passion for me to support rare disease communities and people and individuals living with these diseases. I've been in gene therapy for almost 7 years. I had the fortunate opportunity to launch the first gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy back in 2019, so I've seen some of the transformative effects of bringing a product from clinical stage to commercial stage, and that's my job. I have an incredible team focusing on the insurance companies and getting patients access to the therapies. We have a team of individuals that, from a commercialization perspective, it starts years in advance of an approval. In fact, I have a team already educating about our programs with insurance companies, whether that be your Cignas, your Aetnas, United Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, but also these state Medicaid programs. There's 50 different programs. So we have a team that goes out there and educates our, what we call insurance companies, our payers, in advance of a launch to help prep for commercialization. We also offer patient support services as well, and we'll touch about that here today. We heard a lot about the diagnostic journey and the odyssey in rare disease and how difficult that is with a family. We're going to focus on a different journey. We're going to talk about the journey through clinical studies, clinical trials. What does that look like with FDA? We have experts on stage that can walk us through some of the meaning and the processes and how it's different than traditional drug development. In addition to that, there's the regulatory approval process itself. These are all journeys that take time, energy. There's teams of teams at Rocket working day and night with FDA to try and get our products approved and through the system. And lastly, when we get them to market, our job is to help bring them to market and get expanded access for more patients that can benefit from the product overall. So with that said, nothing happens without the individuals, the families, the caregivers throughout all these journeys. So maybe we could start out with defining some of the regulatory pathways for rare diseases. I don't know, Alan, you want to start off, and maybe we'll talk about some terminology we have.
Sure. Feel free to
Go ahead, Alan.
check, both of you. So very quickly, most of these, the gene therapies typically go through a biologic license application or a BLA. Sometimes, if you've worked in pharma, sometimes you may have heard of a new drug application. It's similar but different. In this case, you have a different center that typically regulates biologics, called Center for Biologics and Evaluation and Research. But the requirements of safety and efficacy are still the main issue. And it's CBER, a number of years ago, FDA split CBER and CDER, which was the drug group, in part because of what I refer to within the office as the funky technology versus the traditional technology. It's the vaccines and the serums and the toxins and things like that that really needed its own group of scientists and review, et cetera. And just as a fun fact, biologics are licensed under the Public Health Service Act, so there's a different, quote, statutory provision, but the format and the requirements are by and large the same as a new drug application. There's, on the drug side, I'll separate just briefly. I kind of call it very quickly this. If I've invented the wheel, that's the new drug application. That's typically your Pfizer's, your Johnson & Johnson's, your large companies. Then you get folks who knock off the wheel, okay? And that's the Tevas of the world. That's your generic drugs, volume, volume, volume. They're not doing clinical studies. And then you got somebody in the middle, which is sort of the 505(b)(2). They're modifying the wheel. On the biologic side, you don't have that sort of middle path. They've created something called a biosimilar, but it's typically, in your case, it would be a biological product. So again, the same general data will be required, but there are, for certain types of life-saving conditions and things along those lines, there can be what they call an accelerated pathway. Accelerated pathway doesn't necessarily mean in and of itself that you will get approved faster. That depends on, there's something called priority review and standard review, which is 6 or 10 months. But it really, the concept is meet with FDA early. That FDA is determined, based on statute and regulations, that certain life-threatening diseases, typically there's an unmet need, there's no alternative. I'm being very high level here, but the idea is that we want to incentivize the development of these products and sort of as I won't call it a reward, but we're trying to pick winners more than losers. So the concept is that you'd have more interactions with FDA at earlier points. In certain cases, with certain types of the regenerative medicine advanced therapy, it's a kind of accelerated approval. The concept is that you may not need the typical clinical data you would have. There'd be maybe reliance more on surrogate endpoints. So the concept of this accelerated approval, and I'm using it in a broad term, is that the agency will work with you to try to see if they can find a faster pathway, not sacrificing safety or efficacy, but recognizing that time is of the essence, that there's a lot of ways to get there, and let's try to help the company earlier in the process, not because other companies don't matter, but frankly, and I'm not knocking anybody who may have worked in the dental industry, but there's probably not going to be much other than maybe oral cancer, there's really not much in the dental area or certain acne, dermatological, that FDA says, well, it's really important that a teenager get another acne medication. But someone who's got a certain type of cancer or certain types of AIDS or life-threatening diseases, we want to try to facilitate. So that's sort of the concept of accelerated approval, and that's where you get into the issues with biologics, with this, with accelerated approval and the regenerative medicine advanced therapy, which is sometimes called RMAT.
Yeah, I gotcha. And I know you're an expert in this.
Yeah, and I'll just, that was a great overview. I'll just very briefly add, we think that the real benefit of a designation like RMAT is the increased interaction that you get with the agency. And I think Rocket has 3 RMAT designations, if I'm not mistaken. One of them for the Danon disease therapy, and have, in part, because of that designation, been able to identify a pathway for accelerated approval, supported by a biomarker. So, in principle, and this is a great test case that we're all very hopeful that this is going to result in getting this therapy to Danon patients more quickly. The only other thing I'll add about FDA is, as Alan said, cell and gene therapies are regulated by CBER, but there's an office, it's called a super office actually within CBER that actually handles the review process, called the Office of Therapeutic Products. The important thing to know about it is it's highly specialized. It was set up just to review advanced therapies. And it's only about 2 years old now, about 450 individuals. And it was set up in response to some issues that were identified prior to 2 years ago with various aspects of the review process. And I think it's a really good example of how FDA leadership has responded to the needs of the field, but really to the needs of patients.
The interactions, if I may, the interactions, if any kind of business, you can do things by email and all that, and go back and forth, and you send documents, and there's form letters. But the idea is that you really, whether on Zoom or in person, you can see the body language, you can explain, there's a dialogue, as opposed to I'm going to submit a bunch of data, FDA will respond to me at some point, then I got to interpret it, hire the lawyers, God bless us all, but then we have to, then you have to sort of interpret it, and then you maybe have to come up and what did FDA really mean? You have a meeting with somebody, you actually see their face, they hear it. Often when there's a patient advocate there or a doctor who's in that space, and there can be a discussion. Well, maybe you shouldn't do that, but our experience might be you may want to try that. Mm-hmm. And then, well, we don't want to necessarily do that, or here's the reasons. Now you've got a dialogue, and maybe you only have an hour, but man, that hour can be incredibly effective than, let's just say, months of going back and forth. And so the interactions shows that FDA cares, and also it makes it more real, more human.
Yeah, and I can tell you from a Rocket perspective, like I said, we have an incredible regulatory team who does this daily work back and forth. And the voice of the individuals living with these diseases and the caregivers and the families and the patient advocacy groups are so critically important to get their stories out, not only within FDA and through the approval process, but when you get these products to market too, the patient voice is hugely important to the insurance companies and fighting for what's right for your child or yourself, for example, or a loved one. What about, maybe Mike, this can go to you. What are you seeing with trends? Past, 5 years, are we seeing increased regenerative therapies like cell and gene therapies being approved? Are we seeing a steady state? What does it look like from a trend? Are we seeing more approvals these days, or what's going on?
Yeah, we are. I think there is in excess of 40 cell and gene therapies approved by FDA now. When I started at ARM 6 years ago, it was 2, I think. We saw 9 last year, which was the highest ever, and 7 in the prior year, I think. And we're expecting there could be as many as 10 this year. So they're not huge numbers yet, but very impactful therapies. And they are, the trend is a trend that's continuing upwards.
Yeah, to me, that translates what we heard as a theme here is hope, right? Hope for future treatments, hope for our treatments, hope for these rare disease communities to get these therapies through the process. It is a process. It takes time. It's, you can't compromise, like you said, safety and efficacy first. But I know there's a lot of changes happening with the government in general, with FDA, and there's probably some concern from the community about changes, and with change causes some disruption. But what's your perspective? Maybe you can, I know, Mike, we talked about this a little bit from an ARM perspective. What are you seeing? Because you interact with FDA. You see some of these stakeholders that are critical to the process. What have you observed?
So we're I don't live in D.C., but our office is in D.C., so as you can imagine, it's very quiet right now. It's not. I think without dismissing any legitimate concerns, it's important to understand that when an administration changes, things like regulatory freezes, things like turnover in certain areas are actually common. What's not common here, I think, is the pace at which it's occurring, and the fact that the political appointees, the bosses of these new the commissioner of FDA, for example, are not in place yet. So kind of a lot of the common communication channels just sort of about what's going on have broken down a little bit. There have been, as you've all read in the news, a lot of layoffs. Interestingly, and I'm not sure to be honest, whether to take this with optimism yet, we've heard very little about CBER. And I know for a fact that senior leadership there is still intact. There are some risks there because in the OTP, the group I spoke about specifically, has a significant number of probationary employees. And they're basically easier to fire, if you will, than those who are not under probationary status. But so far, we have not heard about any significant number of layoffs. And we're advocating for stability and leadership in that group, and also stability in the highly specialized people that work there and the resources. I will say, I can tell you that I know the people at OTP and at CBER and at FDA in general are still working. They're still doing their jobs, right? And I have had interactions with them on workshops and other things we're working on with them within the past few weeks. So, things are still moving forward, even though it's certainly tumultuous times.
Yeah, if I want to add just to the last point, and then maybe talk to this if I can. So certainly we've seen more products in the cell and the gene therapy and all that. I think I saw a number like maybe 50 or so products. What I would say is that's been beneficial for a couple of reasons. On the FDA front, they're learning more along the way, and that's always a good thing. If you have a situation where the agency doesn't know much, they're going to err on the side of more and more and more, show us more. They don't want to make a mistake. They're a public health organization, so they want to do right by patients. On the other hand, they don't want to they don't do wrong by the patients. It's a little bit like the Hippocratic Oath, to some extent, do no harm. They now have more experience. I'll also tell you, even though I'm the food and drug lawyer, I can tell you that more and more companies are getting funding for some of these things because, well, now people are getting approved. An investor doesn't want to invest if they don't know what's out there, but now companies are getting approved, so now there's a certain viability. I will tell you also that we represent companies in the gene therapy space, and they'll talk about certain particular products. Wow, that product got approved. That now gives us hope as a company. And if there's more money, if there's more hope for the companies to keep going, there's more opportunities for different treatments, okay? And so then it kind of, the success, if you will, or the potential hope, to keep using that word, but the potential hope and opportunity now becomes greater and more people are involved, which means there's more focus on orphan drugs and gene therapy, et cetera. So there's that. As it relates to sort of the new administration, I would agree. Even with the device people that they let go, they're already bringing them back. Many of them are bringing back. There's even some talk that they probably just be a handful of people. But we have seen some senior managers, directors leave. There was someone on the food side who was very senior, and she said, you let go of all my people, and I didn't even get a say. I think it's going to be a morale issue. And so, yes, there may be some probationary people who are let go. It's not clear. On one hand, the agency wanted new and creative thinkers, and then you let go those. But I think that there is a morale issue. And I can just tell you, based on resumes we're getting just as a law firm, people are nervous. And you don't want to lose that institutional memory. Even though there's not a lot necessarily that we know, you don't want to lose you never want to lose good people.
Yeah, so I guess what can, from a individual living with these rare diseases and families and caregivers, their stories and testimonials in front of FDA are motivating. You just heard it today, all the stories that we heard from the families and the individuals living with these diseases. What can we do to help support the morale at FDA? Those are things we can control, right? Is the story, and that's something that we like to do from a Rocket perspective, is bring these patient and these testimonials into the FDA. But any best practices you've seen or heard about?
Well, you can't give them money. That'd be a violation of law. So you can't
yeah.
take them out. Okay. But a quick story, it was a friend of mine who was at FDA, and I was going to take him to dinner. And I had worked with them in private practice. And, I said, let me pick up the tab. And I said, I make more money now that I'm in private practice here at FDA. He goes, I can't let you do that. I said, well, then you pick up the tab. So he didn't go for that. We had to go Dutch, but because he couldn't take money from the outside. Anyway, I would say that there's a couple of things. One is we haven't mentioned the voucher system, and that's not per se FDA, it's Congress, but of course it has a bearing. The voucher concept, the pediatric voucher concept, is that if you get certain products approved, you can get a voucher either to use it towards your next application, certain benefits and costs, and or you can sell it. And so that's, with expirations and things along those lines and the uncertainty of the future of that, even though I think it's been shown to be valuable, that does take Congress. And so one area could be lobbying in that respect, the importance of such a program, which incentivizes companies. Again, a lot of this is incentivizing. The Orphan Drug Act, all of these accelerated approval, the idea is to make it worth candidly people's financial while. I mean, it's, we're doing this altruistically, and it's a fantastic industry, but companies have to, they have to deliver to investors and shareholders. So there's that. I would say also from educating FDA when there are certain programs, because just as we've sort of said throughout, you're not alone. Well, FDA can't know about all these diseases. You only learn about some of these diseases because it hits home. I have a very close friend whose daughter has a rare disease, and I never heard of it. Okay, and he did he raised some money, but he became aware of it because why? Because it affected him. Okay, and I think we all have sort of all similar stories. My mother-in-law has a rare disease, and all of a sudden you learn about something you didn't know because it hits home, but no one else really knows about it. So to some extent, you have to educate FDA about, it's an orphan, but it's also an ultra orphan. So asking me to do 50 patients when there's only 20 people in the country, which is, we've had that with clients, okay? And FDA says, we've got to power up more subjects. There are no more subjects, okay? So even the fact that FDA would ask a question like that to a sponsor, you have to do X, and the company's like, you don't understand. There's not that many patients, period, even if we got 100%, which we're not. So there is a little bit of educating the FDA.
Yeah, and if I can just build on two things that you said, going back to the PRV reauthorization. Unfortunately, that got caught up with politics at the end of the year, and it was supposed to be part of a CR. The votes were there in a bipartisan way to get that passed, and it has been reintroduced in the House as the Give Kids a Chance Act. So when you speak with your congressman, speak with them about that. There's a possibility it could also be lumped into the current CR, but I think that could be kind of challenging. But it's one of our number one legislative priorities this year to get that passed and to get the PRV reauthorized. It's very important, and we think it'll happen. As far as educating FDA, it's something that is extremely important, and we do a lot of that with our members. And the thing I want to state here is it's not, some of that is about the science, a lot of this is cutting edge, but really it's also, I think, patients and patient groups educating FDA about the patient experience, right? And that can happen through meetings like this. FDA is a little bit restricted in what they can do publicly right now, but they do participate in public meetings. We're going to do one in September with FDA, at FDA, on pediatric trials for cell and gene therapy products. So, stay tuned for more on that. But also, I think just in the context of individual regulatory submissions and patients participating in public testimony to advisory committees, that's been very impactful if you look at the Duchenne's example with Elvitis.
And, I was going to say it's educating both the gene therapy and orphan. Even though orphan has been around, 1984, okay? And you have an excellent regulatory affairs person who came from FDA in that group. But, as one who works on orphan drug designations, sometimes the agency thinks that it's part of a larger group, and it gets back to, at times, this is a very discrete group, because FDA has certain, on the orphan drug, it's 200,000 individuals or less, and so FDA will sometimes say, well, what you think is orphan is really part of a larger group, takes you outside, and again, you have to sort of remind them. And they're well-meaning, but they just don't know as much. And so you have to say, no, it's not. I know that that's what you think, and you're not maliciously being wrong. You mean well, but you just don't know enough. This is a discrete group in and of itself, orphan or cell therapy or whatever it may be. So you have opportunities. You have an opportunity to kind of help with the narrative. The challenge always is that, trying to convince an agency of something where they may have their own history and their own experience. So you have to be open-minded to listen to FDA, but at times you may have to be a little bit more aggressive and proactive.
Yeah, and I will say that current leadership at CBER and at OTP have shown a willingness to challenge dogma and traditional thinking. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that not just in public statements, but heard about it countless times from sponsors who share their experience with me in meetings. So, management at FDA speaking up and creating the expectation among staff that you need to give actionable feedback, and we need to keep things moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll pick up, you talked about, lobbying efforts from patient advocacy groups, getting in front of Congress. We had an opportunity to meet with some federal health policymakers recently about the rare disease priority review voucher. And that voucher is basically an incentive program to work in these certain rare diseases. Those dollars that can be used for either speeding up a program really funds our future research and development, and it funds our company to keep going in these disease states. We had an opportunity to meet with key constituent or Congress staff, Meg and I actually, last year, and there's high bipartisan support for the priority review voucher program because it means you're going to have more development in rare diseases. And they get that. We met with specialists who are focusing just on rare disease, and we've told our story about our patient groups that we support. We talk about our programs just so we get that groundwell of support, and I think it comes down to focusing on morale and really, they have a mission on their end, we have a mission on our end. Everyone's got a role in this room and online in the process. And that's something we got to take control of and empower everybody to keep fighting for these therapies to come to market. I'll mention a little bit about access. When you do the commercialization process, you get approval. I can tell you with confidence in my past experience that these I shouldn't say patient, but individual stories of people living with diseases are hugely impactful to an insurance company. They do not understand rare disease. The physicians that are treating these patients, individuals do, the individuals who have the disease do. Our team goes out there and educates about that, and they get them to understand it's not just about the data, maybe patient-reported outcomes. There's real-world evidence that's generated throughout the life cycle of a program and ongoing evidence that can help get access to these therapies for a broader set of patients. So it doesn't stop here. That journey continues on for quite some time. Let's talk a little bit about collaboration. We have a lot of different people in the room here, online, different nonprofits, organizations. What are some of the things we can do from your perspective as best practices to come together across these different functions and expertise to help really bring this process forward across the various stakeholders? It could be government, it could be anybody. But any thoughts or best practices? Maybe Alan, you start, and then Mike go.
Sure, I was going to let Mike answer first.
Oh, go ahead,
but no, I'm good. I'll
ahead.
figure it out. No, what I would say is coordination is probably one best practice, and it sounds kind of obvious and or silly, but when you have such let's say it's a rare disease or something like gene therapy where there's not a lot, just anything that's kind of narrow, sometimes you'll find people who all are well-meaning, but they're all going off on their particular track because they've got their own reasons. And so you've got a lot of people really going for the same goal, but they're all hitting different people at different times, and there's not a one message, and there's also a lot of duplication of effort. And so I would say that when you can get, sometimes it's partnering up with other patient advocacy groups. Let's say the issue is orphan drug, okay, and working through NORD or whatever, and those kinds of programs. When there are certain, if there's gene therapy coalitions or patient advocacy groups where the gene therapy might be a potential option, getting those people together. I'm not suggesting that any of these people would be your enemy, but they may not have necessarily been your immediate friend. But you all have a common goal. And so I think that the more outreach you do towards those people, it's still a rare disease, but then the numbers look bigger. That is, the number's important because of the rare and all of that stuff. But then you're showing both the patients, you're really not alone, not only within this disease, but there are a lot of people who have, unfortunately, rare disease. But you're also showing a Congress, you're showing an FDA that if you had concerns, not necessarily FDA, but maybe Congress, well, is it really worth it? Okay? Because it's only affecting so many people, and so I can't spend money on everything. Well, I say, wait a second, it's not just that rare disease, but it's a lot of rare diseases. It's certain technology that you're supporting, the voucher program, all of those things then make it seem more, well, okay, it also makes, I don't like the word business sense, but it makes more sense. And I'm not just catering to a few people, but it's actually affecting a lot. And as one of the speakers said before, all of the ripple effects that it has. It's not just the caregiver, but hospital costs. And then now this is actually a real issue that you can put on your agenda. And I think if there was coordination among the various groups to educate, not just about the disease, but about the need for more research in these areas, I think that's probably helpful.
Yeah, and I'll add a few things. It's really important to collaborate on education, hugely important, and I think today's a good example of that. I spend a lot of time working with our members on pre-competitive issues. A lot of these are around manufacturing, right? So these are competitors, and competition is important. But history has shown us that for a field to succeed, you need a certain amount of critical mass of standardization and best practices, just so everybody isn't doing their own thing, right? This also helps FDA, because when people are evaluating things in a common way, when they're doing things in a more common way, it makes FDA, it makes it easier for them to evaluate the regulatory submissions. So we really encourage pre-competitive collaboration. A good example of that is a meeting we held with developers, academics, and FDA last November around platform technologies and the application of platform technologies in gene editing specifically. Now, what that means, a platform is something that's broad that you can build on, right? And companies like Rocket are doing this, for example, with their delivery systems, right? Using an AAV platform for multiple different diseases. And the idea is that once you establish and rigorously demonstrate that your platform works in a consistent way, you shouldn't have to run all of the same testing and demonstrate all of the same things to FDA over and over and over again, as if you're starting at square one every time. So that's what we're striving for, and that's a discussion and debate we had with FDA, and they've been responsive, and they're thinking about it and actually releasing more guidance on that, on how companies can do this. And it's really towards the common goal of being able to make it to get these therapies in an affordable way and also a timely way to rare disease patients.
I'd also add, we represented a company, we still represent the company. It was not in the gene therapy space, but it was first product, only product, publicly traded, okay? CEO happened to have worked at FDA, thought FDA was all kind of wrong, and he was going to show them. And I'm like, I wouldn't take that approach. Former is you're the former FDAer. And it was a product that would be the first of its kind in 30 or 40 years, prescription product. And FDA and the patient advocacy group was all for it. And FDA at the last minute decided, the company thought they were in label negotiations. They thought they had approval. And then there was somebody at FDA who raised some concerns. And all of a sudden, it was not a senior person. The CEO, of course, thought it was conspiracy by the competitor. And the trade association, or excuse me, the patient advocacy group, wrote lots of letters to FDA. And it made its way into the New York Times of the world. And I forget exactly the title, but it was something to the effect of, why is FDA not approving products that would benefit children? Okay? And it was like a cover page. And now the drug company was just kind of, they really weren't behind, they weren't paying for it, but they sort of recommended, we're just a drug company, who cares about us? But this patient advocacy group, which was very known, and we know that FDA internally was getting a lot of heat. Now, you have to be careful, because if you start inundating FDA, all of a sudden, FDA is empathetic to people's needs. That's a public health organization, and you don't want to play that hand too quickly or too fast, because now you're almost bullying FDA, and anyone would be offended if you start telling them how to do their job. But there was so much whatever that that FDA was able to work with them that would have taken more like 3 to 6 months to get approved. They basically met with the company the day after the complete response letter, and in essence, how are we going to get this product approved? And we basically, and it was about another month, but not 6 months. Now, of course, no one wants a month delay, but this was one where the patient advocacy group clearly put pressure, made national news. It put FDA in a very awkward position. I think they were wrong, and that's a situation where there was collaboration earlier, that the drug company had made such a great relationship with the patient advocacy group, to some extent that the drug company didn't even have to do as much. They let the patient advocacy group really kind of run with it from a public health perspective.
Yeah, those are incredible stories to hear. I think the theme, again, of hope and empowerment and fighting for what's right is so important. And we're here to help support across different functions, different levels of expertise, different organizations. So thank you for that. I think what we're gonna do is close things out. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then we're gonna turn it over to the next topic. So if there's a couple questions, we can field those either online or in the audience. We'll start there. Oswald.
making me jog, Oswald. I'm coming.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, Oswald Bentink. I work with Mike in the Value and Access Group. You talked a lot about regulatory pathways and incentives, and clearly that's making a big difference in terms of speeding up access for or approval of gene therapies. My question is really more about the healthcare system in general. You feel like a lot of stakeholders at the moment are worried about gene therapies being sustainable. You know, the one-time nature of the therapy, the high cost.
Right.
You know, can insurers really kind of bear that type of cost, or even hospitals, et cetera? What, in your view, you know, can be done and must be done to really get people to believe in the kind of long-term success of gene therapies or viability of them?
Well, I think your question almost answered it to some extent, which is basically, you know, the novelty of it, the difficulty in manufacturing, some of the very serious side effects. Prescription products have side effects, but in some cases, very severe. And also, you know, there's a special expertise when it comes for administration of the product. So there are challenges with it, and I think to some extent, I don't want to be sort of time will tell, but with anything, in the beginning, when something is new, there's always the hesitancy, okay? I was going to give an example, but I don't particularly like the CEO. But what I was going to say, any sort of new technology, you know, whether it was the iPhone or whether it was whatever, okay? My firm is constantly updating stuff with cybersecurity and things like that. We're a law firm. We've got access to a lot of things. And I'm hesitant to do some of these things. I'm almost 58 years old. I'm not looking to do, you know, I have associates and I have, you know, admins. I'm like, y'all figure this out. Well, managing partner says, Alan, you're a member of the firm. You're going to have to learn how to use a computer, okay? So to some extent, we all have there's always resistance to change to some extent. And so I think certainly the companies can advocate that there's really no unique, in and of itself, the fact that it's new doesn't make it wrong or doesn't make it bad or whatever. Obviously, the more data and the more history that there is with these types of products, people will just feel more comfortable with it. That's just sort of the nature of anything. A new car company comes out or a new technology comes out, there's always that hesitancy. You know, I don't deal with it, but crypto, you know, when it came out, everyone thought it was whatever. And I'm not making any statements whether it's good or not, okay? But now it seems to be a little bit more mainstream that certain big banks are whatever, okay? So time often helps people overcome initial issues. I think where the drug company and where the patient advocacy groups can continue is with the education, which is not necessarily now you don't know anything about the disease, but more you see how it's actually working, okay? You took a risk or you took a shot at approving something, whether or not it was accelerated approval or the vouchers or whatever. You thought outside the box and look what has happened. Orphan Drug Act was another one, okay? You have major pharmaceutical companies now that have divisions of orphan drugs, okay? And because it makes sense financially and every which way, but that took time. And so I would say from, you know, Rocket's perspective and patient advocacy groups' perspective is, you know, new doesn't necessarily mean wrong. New doesn't necessarily mean dangerous. New is new, okay? But we do have products on the market in gene therapy. And as long as they are showing that they're as safe, effective as traditional products and patients are still saying, net, we still want it, then I think that, you know, time will be on your side in that respect. Conversely, if there, you know, horrible things happen, all bets are off. You know, pharmacy compounding used to be more of a state issue. Then people died in New England, and all of a sudden Congress went to FDA. Where were you? And FDA says, we don't have the authority. Congress then passed certain authority that FDA could regulate compound. Okay, so that was a reactive thing. But compounding would have probably gone its merry way had there not happened to be sterility issues and manufacturing issues and all of that. But take sort of the one bad apple, and all of a sudden, as long as you don't have too many bad apples, I think it's probably going to be good for the industry.
Yeah, and I agree, time will tell. I'll just give you one more quick thought. You need to remove legal barriers to establishing reimbursement policies that recognize the true value of these therapies. And you need to educate about the cost of these diseases, the real cost of these diseases. It's not just a one-time thing. It happens over a patient's lifetime. And it's significant. And we think, and there's some examples of this already out of ICER, that economically, cell and gene therapies make sense. They obviously make sense if they can save the lives of patients, but economically they make sense.
Excellent. I think we're at time right now. First and foremost, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Mike, for joining us here today, and thank you for the Rocket team and the community that's here to support it. I think days like today are very meaningful because, I was talking to the folks at Lonza, to hear these stories and to hear what we're all doing collectively makes a huge difference. So thank you for what you do to support these products of going through the clinical trial process, manufacturing, FDA approval, and then commercialization. So we really appreciate it and look forward to doing this again.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.